Ladies and gentlemen, a happy Thanksgiving to you and yours as we celebrate the holiday season and Thanksgiving football and week 13 on Fourth and Frames tonight. I'm Rhett Manuel, joined below me by Drew Scott, joined to me on the right by Nate Markham. As tonight we get into our week 13 smash, pass, and stash players. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get it popping.
This should be played at high volume, preferably in a residential area.
And to all of our watchers, listeners, subscribers, wherever you are, whether it's here in the United States, whether it is anywhere else, whether you're on YouTube, X, Facebook, it doesn't really matter. We're so happy you're here with us tonight on Fourth and Frames. Like I said, I'm Rhett, that's Drew, he's Nate. And don't forget to like, subscribe, review to catch anytime a new podcast or short form drops from us here at fantasyandframes.com. Don't forget to lock in at fantasyandframes.com for the latest in rankings, articles, takes, news and notes, everything else. So, guys, it is the eve of the Super Bowl for fat guys. Thanksgiving. It's a great day for family and friends hanging out, football.
It's otherwise known as Skanksgiving tonight, by the way. Cheers to you all you that celebrate. It's those days are behind me, but kudos to all that do. You make the world go down.
Never one I celebrated. But hey, Nate, go ahead and give us enlighten us since we are already off the rails. How are you tonight, buddy?
I'm good. Enlighten you as far as, are you familiar with what Thanksgiving is?
I'm pretty sure I have a general idea, but I don't think we need to go into details. Whatever. Go ahead.
That's
How
fair. I'm good, man. I can't wait. This is it's a little pre-Thanksgiving celebration with my Fantasy and Frames family. So it's like too bad we don't have a plate of food here that we could eat together on the air, which would be fucking disgusting. But
I got a lot of people on my YouTube and TikTok that do that though, and they make a pretty good living just sitting on camera eating food. So I don't know, you might be onto something. That might be an untapped part of the fantasy football industry, you know. Mm-hmm. So you might be onto something. I don't know.
Maybe.
God, I hope not. I hope that is not where we go with this next, because I mean, we are already in week 13, guys. I mean, playoffs are right around the corner. We're in week 2 of the Scott Fishbowl playoffs. That field has been cut down significantly. I'm probably cut out of there after this week too, but it's all right, guys. But besides that, I mean, we are in week 13. After all those bye weeks that we had last week, there are none this week. So, Drew, it's been a while since we've had this. What is it going to be like to have a full slate of players at your allotment this week?
It's great, man. I've got a lot, most of my league, all of my leagues, I think the playoffs start in 2 weeks. And so I have a lot of teams that I say a lot. A few of my redraft teams depend on these next 2 weeks, whether or not I make the playoffs. I got a couple teams that are right on the edge. So I mean, my mental health, my mental well-being is all riding on these next 2 weeks. So it's nice to at least have 1 week of the full lineups, because next week is another tough one right after we get this. So I know I've been looking ahead on some of my rosters that are on the bubble, and there were some troubling looking rosters that week too. So I'm just going to enjoy this while we got it.
Yeah, undoubtedly. So guys, let's go ahead and get into some quick news and notes around the league as we head into week 13. Like we said, no bye weeks this week, so everybody's on the slate this week, including, I believe, 4 Thanksgiving Day games tomorrow. First off, going to the Los Angeles Chargers, J.K. Dobbins is going to miss some time with that knee sprain. Guys, we might talk about it a little bit later, but Gus Edwards probably be back to owning that backfield right now, huh, Nate?
Yeah, I had a little discussion last night about it. It's like I feel like he will be the majority of the carries go to him, and then some of the passing down work could go to Kamani Vidal. Hassan Haskins might chip in. The Chargers have a really tough stretch of games to finish out. So if you're really relying on Gus Edwards, it's a dangerous game to play because the Falcons, the Broncos, the Chiefs, the Buccaneers, I think, are the final four. So not wonderful. But again, especially if Dobbins does miss into next week with this upcoming bye week, if you grabbed him, it was a fruitful endeavor because there should be volume.
Yeah, and after being unceremoniously released last week, Drew, friend of the show, Daniel Jones, signs with the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, it's Sam Darnold's job, but it's a nice insurance policy for them to have just in case they as they get ready to get into the playoffs, huh?
Yeah. I mean, I think it makes sense for him. He's, they have a good offensive-minded head coach who has done well with other quarterbacks. If he does get put into the game, he's got some really solid weapons to throw to. So, I think it's probably best case scenario for him at this point.
Yeah, agreed on that. Speaking of things that are not great to think about right now, the Las Vegas Raiders lose Gardner Minshew to a broken bone. But lo and behold, the cavalry is coming home, ladies and gentlemen. Aiden O'Connell, you might know him as AOC, is returning from IR and is scheduled to start this week. Nate, you have him as your QB1, right?
I have him as my QB number one in my sights for the Chiefs and their pass rush because that is the Black Friday game, and I will say there will be a black flag, a black cloud over the black and silver of the Raiders because I wouldn't want to be AOC in this matchup. But then again, really I think the biggest detriment is Jacoby Myers has been playing so well and been so heavily targeted. It sucks that it's going to be, I assume it's going to be a downgrade from Minshew to AOC for there.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Amon St. Brown currently banged up with a knee injury, but is expected to play. I'm going to go through some warm-ups tomorrow in that opener just to see if everything's good to go. But we know it's a tough matchup. So, Drew, what is our best case scenario for Amon-Ra St. Brown tomorrow?
I mean, to your point, Chicago is a tough matchup for fantasy receivers, and then he's banged up on top of that, so it's not ideal. But if he's active, I'm playing him. I'm just not going to have very high expectations. But if they say he's going to play, he's going to be in my lineup, and I'm pretty much just hoping he finds the end zone, which he hasn't had much of a problem doing this year. So,
right. And then lastly, staying in Detroit, David Montgomery has a shoulder injury, but is expected to play. Both of those guys, both Gibbs and Montgomery, have been startable all year, even with the two backfields. So if he's playing, once again, that's another one of those guys that you're just firing up. Agreed?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So before we get into our week 13 smash, pass, and stash, guys, let's have a little bit of fun tonight, guys. We were talking pre-show, and we decided, what would be fun? Thanksgiving tomorrow, there's a certain lure around the Thanksgiving foods. So what we wanted to do tonight for our listeners was have a very quick 4-round Thanksgiving food draft based off of last name. So I'm going to be the first pick. Nate's going to be the second pick, and Drew is going to be the first pick. So I'm on the clock, and guys, it's going to be a controversial take starting off here because pre-show I said this is the GOAT. This is the best thing they have on a Louisiana Thanksgiving menu. Some of you probably big stuffing people. I think, as you can tell, it's nothing but cooked bread. So I'm going to go ahead with a good dirty rice, aka rice dressing, as our top pick of the draft. Guys, you said I could probably get it later. I don't care. It's that good. Nate, I don't know why you would slander such a thing, but I'm going to need to explain to yourself as to why you hate dirty rice or rice dressing right now, buddy.
No, I don't hate the food. That's just, yeah. So you like player, and I wish I had a great spot on person to compare Louisiana rice dressing to, but I don't at the moment. But you know what? You like, I guess he's from the South, Xavier Legette in the drafts going into the season. If you wanted Xavier Legette, you could have waited till say round 12 or 13. You had to just throw it out there because many of us had never even heard of Louisiana rice dressing, to be fair. But you know what? Hey, screw ADP, average dish placement, and go with Louisiana rice dressing. I don't have a problem with that. There's no hate coming from me. I'm an equal opportunity eater. I like all foods.
So Nate, being that you have the ADP down pack on these vacation foods, Thanksgiving foods and vacation foods, just foods. Why not?
Right.
In that second slot, what are you going with, man?
So funny you say, if it was vacation foods, it wouldn't be this, because this is only a Thanksgiving food. And the reason it's so high on my rankings is because it's the only time of year I have it. I made a point at Thanksgiving with my in-laws this past weekend. Why do we only have this one time a year? And that's the sweet potatoes, sweet yams, whatever anybody wants to call them from your area. But it's got to have the marshmallows on top and extra sweet, just delicious. But it's, I don't know, no one wants to make them any other time of year, but I could have that with many other dishes. So sweet potatoes as the number 2 pick overall. Pretty lofty standards, but I'm going to go with it.
And Drew, because of me and Nate just going completely off the cuff, you were able to get some value at the 103. So go ahead and tell us what you're picking at the 103, man.
Yeah, if I wasn't trying to stick to traditional Thanksgiving food, I would go off the rails here, because I think overall Thanksgiving food is pretty overrated, and I would much rather have I'd much rather you just bring like a bunch of different pastas and some breadsticks and some garlic knots and a big bowl of salad, or bring me like a big buffet of ballpark foods, or like I just overall I don't think Thanksgiving food is that good. I like the holiday for football and getting to hang out. I like the idea of a holiday that revolves around, eating a lot of food and watching football and spending time with family. I just wish the food was a little bit better. But that being said, you guys left me the 101 at 103, which is interesting. So it was like, whenever it's made right, mac and cheese is the easy 101. Like there's nothing that competes with it. So I'll take that. And then on the back end, give me the dinner rolls, give me the bread, give me the Hawaiian sweet rolls, give me those rolls at the first pick in the second round.
Yeah, I was personally a big proponent of why just bread at the top of the second round, but I'm also the guy who took rice dressing at the first pick overall. So I mean, what the hell do I know?
It's whenever you really think about it, if the bread's good, it's like one of the best things on your plate, because again, the rest of the food isn't that good.
Yep. It's on, if you took a consensus of everybody's plate, if there's 12 things to be had on the buffet, the dinner rolls will probably be the most likely on everybody's. It's fair. It's a great call. Bam.
Strong value. So Nate, bounce back in the middle of the second round. What you got for us?
So this is more of a family. It's a hometown recipe, or
so like rice dressing. Recipe. This is your rice dressing.
This is because it's rice casserole. It's essentially, instead of being the dirty rice, it's more
put a little Midwest spin on it. You got to put it in a casserole if you're in the Midwest.
Oh yeah, everything goes in a casserole, and then a little bit of that cream of mushroom soup with the rice, and those French's, the crunchy onions.
Straws?
Yeah, put those on top, and I think that's a topper for all casseroles. So yeah, I'm starch. I'm a little starch and carb heavy so far to start between sweet potatoes and rice casserole, but I like that. The meat and potatoes of the team, but no meat yet.
Oh, well, you're not going to find any meat on your plate at this point, because you guys we all have that draft strategy. There's one guy in every draft that's like, if something falls, you're just going to spam that position, hoping to make a trade later, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
That's where I am right now. So at the 2-3 turn, I'm just going to go ahead and take ham and turkey right now. And then if one of you needs to make, if either of you needs to make a deal later on, that's what I'm here for, guys. I mean, if you want to go ahead and send me that mac and cheese for the turkey, so you have an actual dish in there, I mean, we'll be good to go, Drew. Come on.
No, I would rather eat mac and cheese sandwiches than trade for one of those meats.
Yeah, that's double dipping the quarterbacks in rounds 2 and 3. He has both of them, and one of them I'll be able to trade to somebody that doesn't have enough quarterback later on, and you're gonna have them stuck on your plate, sitting there with no delicious sides around it.
That's right.
But Nate, go ahead. What do you have next for us? Because I feel real good about my draft right now, because I'm loaded up on all the things that are going to make me take a good nap later on, which was ineligible to be drafted. So
this is probably where, if there was ever going to be a trade to be had, I think me and you could have some talks here, because, as long as that turkey's cooked right, which is a smoked turkey and, not overly dry, if that's got some upside in it, I've got another potato dish, which is the good old mashed potatoes and gravy, which is very good value in the third round. And maybe I could swap that mashed potatoes for the turkey. We help each other out. I get the QB you need. You get the running back or the receiver, whatever we're equating starches to in the fantasy football landscape. But I'll add some mashed potatoes to this team.
Not a bad value in the third round. You're right. So Drew, you had that 3-4 turn. Go ahead and tell us what you got right here, because once again, you've just been snaking value this entire draft. You get another one right here, buddy.
Just got to take what falls to you. You just got to play the board, take what falls to you, stay water. It's the most important draft tip you can have, And so once again, the 101 of desserts is left on the table. So I'm going to go ahead and take it. And I'm going to take a nice warm apple pie. And if you're really feeling a little freaky, some, a nice scoop of vanilla ice cream on top of it. And it's the last thing you need to just get sent to heaven at the end of your meal, man. You can't do any better. I got to go again.
Yeah.
So sorry, I got to thinking about apple pie. I got hot and bothered and lost track of thought. So my last pick. This is a Midwestern white people Thanksgiving would not be complete without a casserole. And so give me my mama's hash brown casserole to round it out. So no meats, but I get to eat mac and cheese with rolls and some hash brown casserole on the side, and then a nice slice of apple pie. And honestly, that sounds like a perfectly fine meal for me. I will eat that and be just fine. So I might make a plate of that tomorrow just for celebration's sake. I'm going to set you a plate that just has that on it, and I'm going to send that to you guys for my happy Thanksgiving. So yeah, that rounds it out for me.
That's great. I love that. That's wonderful, man. That is American as American. He gets mac and cheese, apple pie, some rolls, and hash brown casserole. I took your for my final pick. I heard the apple pie, and I'll do the equation of apple pie is kind of the versatile running back that it's sexy and everybody wants to go after. But I'm gonna go after the old the standard, the no pass catching back, the Derrick Henry of the dessert table, and that's gonna be pumpkin pie. Tried and true, probably boring in some regards. Some people are gonna say, "Oh, you should never just simplify and go with pumpkin pie." But guess what it does? Gets the job done. It scores a touchdown, except for this past week for Derrick Henry. But we get the idea, the correlation. The pumpkin pie always delivers. And it rounds out my heavy starch and delicious plate that I'm going to have.
So
before you get into your pick, so Colby, it's a good idea, but nobody has drafted 3 cold beers. What? Or 4 cold beers. What? Those have not been off the board yet. And stuffing, I don't know if stuffing and dressing are considered the same thing. Rhett technically took a dressing at 101, a Louisiana rice dressing. I don't know if that takes stuffing off the board. I wouldn't want it personally because I think stuffing is awful. But so I don't know if that would still be on the board anyway, because a dressing did go 101.
That's what I considered it as. He called it a dressing. So
yeah, I kind of took it all the table. Yeah.
So guys, Nate, you mentioned having that versatile running back. In pumpkin pie. Drew has a running back in apple pie. And so if we're equating desserts to running backs, I'm going 0 RB in my draft. And in my final pick, I'm taking the green bean casserole, baby. So we all have very distinct flavors right here. I think Drew just wants to basically not have anything of actual substance in his plate. He's just going to go all carbs. Nate's going for comfort food, and I'm just going for the most southern thing possible out of all of our plates. So you know what? I think it's very accurate as to who we all are as people with our Thanksgiving drafts tonight. So it's a good time, man. I'm glad we did this. So
that was good.
Before we get into why you're all here, actually, which is fantasy football, don't forget about Underdog, formerly known as Underdog Fantasy, who is offering free money if you use the promo code FRAMES. That is a 100% matchup on your deposit up to $1,000. And $1,000 could buy a lot of green bean casserole, ladies and gentlemen. So don't miss out on all the fun and all the action over at Underdog today. So, boys, week 13, it is almost playoff time. We had plays and fades dropped on Fantasy and Frames today for both IDP and positional players. And like we do every week, we want to get into our smash, pass, and stash players. Our smash players are players that are outside that top 20 running backs, top 15 running backs, top 8 tight ends, and top 12 quarterbacks in the Fantasy Pros Expert Consensus Rankings, or ECR, as we will call them. A pass player is someone that is inside the top 35 wide receivers, top 20 running backs, top 12 tight ends, and the top 20 quarterbacks in the ECR. And then our stash players are players that are rostered in under 50% of sleeper leagues. So tonight, Drew, I'm going to let you go ahead and lead us off.
Okay.
You mentioned Southern players. You mentioned the South.
Yeah,
my boy right here, he gets in the end zone. He does his little horsey touchdown dance. He's a vibe. You can barely understand. I can barely understand what he's saying, and I'm from the South. But man, tell us why Xavier Legette is going to be a smash play this week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
I don't know if there's a difference in our Southern languages, but I can understand him just fine, man. I think he talks perfectly good English. But I feel like I should probably preface this pick by saying that this would actually be a Jalen Coker segment if I knew he was healthy and he was going to play. But since I don't, let's talk about Xavier Legette for now. So I know David Moore is the hot topic for Carolina after the game that he had last week, but since Bryce Young was put back in as the starting quarterback for the Panthers in Week 8, Legette is essentially tied with David Moore in route percentage and first read percentage, and he's slightly ahead of him in air yards share, receiving yards per game, and yards per route run. So if they've been on the field and involved in an offense on a pretty level amount, just give me the guy that's been a more consistent pass catcher and what I believe is just the better player and the most consistent option if Coker isn't available. Legette's had at least 6 targets in 3 of 4 games since Bryce Young was put back in at starting quarterback, but he hasn't scored a touchdown since he had back-to-back games in Week 8 and Week 9 with a touchdown. So luckily for Legette and the rest of the Carolina pass catchers this week, they're playing Tampa Bay. They've given up the 7th most receiving touchdowns on the year, and they've also been the 2nd best matchup for fantasy receivers over the last 8 weeks if you're looking at schedule-adjusted fantasy points given up to the position. So in a matchup that's this good, give me the guy that's been on the field, has been playing consistently well, and it seems like he might be due for a little bit of positive TD regression as well. So Xavier Legette is a smash play for me this week, and then just insert Jalen Coker here instead if he ends up playing. But I like those guys in those roles for Carolina this week.
And I mean, I can't disagree with you because whenever I get to my smash play in a little bit, we've been making jokes all year about whether the guy I'm going to talk about is actually back. Guys, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but he may actually be arriving. But before we get into Nate's smash player, Ishmael has a question for us. Who would you rather start? He has Hopkins or Westbrook, Devon Belay, Roma Dunze on waiver PPR. Thank you. So who would you rather out of those guys?
I'm still, I'm going to lean D-Hop as far as valuable touches and opportunity share. Hopkins has been targeted in the red zone often. Ever since he really got acclimated with that offense, they've looked his direction. Nick Westbrook-Akini, I will say I love the fact that it's touchdown, monster, 6 of 7 or 7 of 8, but go through his receptions and his targets along the way. And you're talking about a touchdown rate that I don't want to say it's unsustainable because each week we've been saying that, but I don't like banking on the touchdown to support any type of week. Both Vele and Adunze, on waivers, I'm leaning Hopkins. Drew?
Yeah, I agree. I would go Hopkins, and honestly, I would be interested in picking up Odunze too. I think even dropping one of the last name, not the last name that you had on the list there. I think he's had double-digit targets multiple straight weeks now. He's got a good matchup this week against Detroit, another good matchup against Minnesota in a couple weeks for fantasy receivers. And so if he keeps getting targeted as much as he has, and we start to see some progression, as we see with rookies a lot of times later in their rookie year. I think he's worth a stash. So I would start Hopkins, but I would look at seeing if you could make a way to pick up Odunze as well.
Yeah, and I agree with both of those things. But let's not sleep on Devon Valet, because ever since Bo Nix has kind of started coming into his own, I mean, Valet has been 60-plus yards receiving each of the past 3 weeks. Early in the year, he was a high-volume guy. And, I mean, Denver, for some reason, is just surprisingly good, and they're getting better and better as the weeks go on. Cortland Sutton is now being seen as a top 12 fantasy receiver on a weekly basis now. So, I mean, this Denver offense has come on strong over the past month. And a little bit of betting advice. I mentioned this in my Plays and Fades article over at Fantasy and Frames today. If you still are looking for Offensive Rookie of the Year odds, this may be the last time you get Bo Nix in the plus odds. He was at plus 120 as of this morning on Offensive Rookie of the Year odds. So, I mean, that's a good play right there, especially with Denver on the upswing and the Commanders on the downswing. But, you know, that's a little betting advice for somebody who might be interested in that. But, Nate, right now we're interested in what you have to say about your smash player for this week. A guy who was in a bad offense but has been one of the few bright spots in that bad offense this year.
Yeah, you actually just touched on one of the reasons why I like him is mentioning the opposite direction that Washington has since starting off like gangbusters. And that's Tony Pollard. Is the RB20 on the week, barring really the last few minutes of that game last week against Dallas. Washington was a sputtering offense. And what way to prevent a sputtering offense from gaining the explosiveness that would keep Tennessee off the field is to run the ball. And the one thing that I think that Tony Pollard has done extremely well, shockingly, is run the ball. He's 7th in the NFL in rush yards. What's Washington done terrible? Stop the run. They're second in, they've allowed the second most yards. But the one thing that I will say that I want to pay attention to is that they've been kind of stingy against targets to the running back, which is one of the reasons why I like Tony Pollard. Is he has that blend of upside where, like we saw last week, 24 carries, 5 targets. He's 7th, as I mentioned, in rushing yards, but he's also 7th in targets amongst running backs. So the dichotomy of the running back is the one thing that I like, especially in this matchup. And I talked about this last week in the Rico Dowdle against Washington, is the explosive run rate allowed by Washington. The defense as a whole has holes. And with no Tajay Spears, potentially, he's still in concussion protocol. I know he appeared at practice today, but he was donning the Guardian cap, and I don't believe that it's real likely that Spears has any type of workload, even if he plays. And we saw that Pollard had 24 carries at the 25, really only one with the Julius Chestnut last week. So I'm comfortable with Tony Pollard as the RB20. He's closer to my, borderline RB1, like RB13. Yep. I have him right now, maybe RB14. So I love the matchup.
Yep, I'm with you. I got him up there this week as well.
Yeah, so we talked Tony Pollard. We talked Xavier Legette. Guys, I'm about to go a direction I didn't think I was going to go at any point this year after we left him for dead when Andy Dalton, the Red Rifle. You remember that name, right? Andy Dalton, the Red Rocket, the Red Rifle, whatever you want to call him. We left Bryce Young for dead once Andy Dalton assumed that starting role. And then Andy Dalton gets hurt, and then they decide to go back to Bryce Young. And guys, it's so funny how the quarterback position works. Because you would think, and God bless us, I didn't know why we didn't see the light up until now. But it's so funny that when you get a second-year quarterback who was on a second head coach in 2 years, you give him a competent head coach and you give him a little bit of time, all of a sudden, guys, does Bryce Young look like an NFL quarterback all of a sudden over these past couple weeks? It's strange to say that sometimes whenever these guys have a lot of upheaval, sometimes all these guys need is a little bit of development time. Strangely enough, Bryce Young starting to get a little bit comfortable under Dave Canales, learn the system, learn these receivers, and all of a sudden, he's starting to look a little bit better on a week-to-week basis, and I get it. He's still down at quarterback 28 in the ECR rankings this week. He's not for everybody. But it's coming along for him. You can definitely say that. He's been a quarterback 2 the past 2 weeks. And last week against your Kansas City Chiefs, there were some times where it was not just pure luck. There were some times when He averaged 7.5 yards per attempt in the game. You saw him back there. He was comfortable, which we hadn't really seen previously. That offensive line is coming along. He was throwing guys open against a very good Chiefs defense last week. He was patient.
He had one of the best games of any quarterback against Kansas City this year.
Yeah, he was 21 for 35 for 263 and a touchdown and didn't throw an interception. Like, it was something along those lines. So, like, it was a really solid game that he had. And all of a sudden, he's patient. He's not panicking. He kind of looks like the game is slowing down a little bit. So all I'm saying is this. I'm not saying that if you're in a one quarterback league, throw Bryce Young into your lineups and expect him to be the top guy in the quarterback one on the week. I'm not saying that at all. But in a format like a super flex format where you start two quarterbacks and you're going to need a second quarterback at some point. I get that everybody is playing this week, but if you're looking for a little bit of upside, Bryce Young also still has that rushing upside. So when you have a guy like Bryce Young who seems to be coming along and he's playing that Tampa Bay defense, which has been the second best matchup for fantasy quarterbacks this season, all I'm saying is you could do a lot worse right now. For example, you could start Aiden O'Connell this week.
You could. That would be a choice.
It would be a choice, but we could also argue that Bryce Young would be a better choice in that situation.
Yeah, 100%. I've got Bryce at quarterback 23 this week. Now that'll drop to 25 if Lawrence and Purdy end up playing. But to your point though, in a super flex league, in a 2 quarterback league, he's still a guy that's right there on the line where I would be playing him this week. So I'm with you. I'd rather start him over Aiden O'Connell for sure.
You'd rather start him over whoever the Giants are going to throw out there.
Yep.
Who Dallas would throw out there. And these are all offenses that well, not the Giants, they have neighbors, but Dallas supposedly has a better offense, but yet here we are. Bryce Young may just keep an eye on it because if he's also in one of your dynasty rosters or he's available in your dynasty leagues, if he finishes this year strong, then he might be a name that's going to be shooting up some draft boards next year. So if you're in a dynasty format, if you could stash him ahead of time, this is a prequel to what could be coming up at the end of the show. But here's a bonus stash if you can. Perhaps stash Bryce Young right now.
Yeah, I know I highlighted Xavier Legette, but he does a good job of passing of just spreading the ball around as well. I mean, Legette, Jatavion Sanders, Coker whenever he was playing, Thielen now that he's back.
David Moore.
David Moore now too as well. I mean, for several weeks now. He gets everybody involved. So I mean, Legette's my favorite of the pass catchers this week if Coker doesn't play, but Sanders could even be a viable option at tight end, and he's pretty buried in ECR this week.
Wait, and forgive me for not following up on this, but is Sanders playing? I mean, he left on a stretcher.
True. Yeah, that's true.
I don't know if that's any. I think he landed on his head, and I don't know.
I completely forgot that happened, but no, that's a good point.
I thought I saw some reports where they said he was, quote, fortunate, but it also sounded like he may not play this week. But nonetheless,
something scary.
Yeah, for sure. So that's our first round of Smash players. We had Bryce Young, we had Tony Pollard, we had Xavier Legette. Nate, your second Smash player, another favorite of mine, has kind of been up and down this season, but you know what? We trust the process, and we trust his guys' ability to get open. So tell us why Tank Dell against the Jacksonville Jaguars is a place you want to go this week.
Well, it was mostly just, it's Thanksgiving. So I wanted to give thanks to you for being a friend. And I was going to just, highlight all of your favorite players and make sure that, we circle back. That's kind of where I was at. But then again, I also thought, well, why not pick on the Jacksonville Jaguars pass defense? When they run such a heavy man D that Tank Dell, if you watched some of his routes last week, and granted, he didn't get the ball thrown to him on a couple of them, but he made them look silly on the routes. And I'm starting to believe that, lower body injuries, they can take a while to get 100%, get everything going. I know it just seems like an easy scapegoat for why he hasn't been performing, but I think there's something to be said with that. Couple that with Jags, worst EPA versus pass in the league by a long shot. It's not even close. Last time they played, Tank Dell didn't get a chance to play. Either did Joe Mixon, though. And Stroud went off for 345, and Nico had a great game. I expect Nico to have another great game. I expect Joe Mixon to have a fine game. But I think that this is the game where Tank Dell actually sees that, 7-8 target game and does a lot with that because he can exploit a man coverage. Because I think that the Texans are looking to kind of get rid of last week's sour taste in a matchup that shouldn't have been as close as it was, and do their best to try to keep pace. And hopefully they have to keep pace because maybe Trevor Lawrence is back, and maybe Trevor Lawrence's arm can propel that offense and make this more of a competitive game and keep Stroud on the field, throwing the ball much more than Joe Mixon running the ball when they're in a positive game script. So I'm back in on Tank Dell. Separation is there. All the accolades that we've talked about all season long about why he can be in that position. This might be that week to, have the trust reinstilled in Tank Dell.
And yeah, I agree with you in terms of instilling the trust in Tank Dell. But I mean, let's just ask the question because it needs to be asked. There's been some real year 2 regression with CJ Stroud. With the Tank Dell pick this week, are you concerned that could potentially derail Tank Dell, or do you think this is just one of those things where you just kind of going to trust the fact that during the first game of that year, this season against Jacksonville, CJ Stroud was a monster and that offense was a monster in general?
I think it's every heavy potential passing attack against Jacksonville that can elevate even a little bit of a regressive case of the quarterback scenario like CJ Stroud has had. There's no doubt he's definitely been, and I don't want to call him a disappointment because I won't, because Colby's listening potentially, and if I do that, then he won't be my friend again. He just hasn't been as wonderful as we were hoping going into year 2.
Yeah. Jacksonville's just their get right game, man, for everybody. So yeah, even with him struggling, I'm with you. I think Stroud's going to play really well this week.
Yeah, and I had to ask the question, but I also do have CJ Stroud as one of my plays in my article on fantasyandframes.com this week. So I mean, I think we're all on the same board, as long as far as CJ Stroud goes. But Drew, Nate mentioned the fact that we're just trying to name all of my favorite guys in this Smash segment tonight. The train keeps rolling, baby. Tell them about Gino. Let them know.
Yeah, this is one that if you've watched the show for a little bit, me and Rhett love this guy. Yeah, Gino, I'm not going to pass up an opportunity to say good things about him. But Gino aside, this is honestly more so just to give fantasy managers a little bit of confidence if you're looking at Gino as a starter this week. But whatever fantasy app you're using, it's probably trying to tell you that the Jets are a bad matchup, but that just hasn't been the case lately. So over the last 6 weeks, which includes 5 games and then their bye week, they've actually been the second best matchup for fantasy quarterbacks based on schedule adjusted fantasy points given up to the position. Even Russell Wilson, he was the quarterback 3 back in week 7. So I know that the fantasy finishes haven't been ideal his last few games, but Gino's still been playing good ball this year, man. He's first in the league in passing yards per game. He's 4th in the NFL in adjusted completion percentage. But for fantasy purposes, the deep ball percentage hasn't been there. The deep completion percentage has been off. It's been below average. And then the touchdowns just haven't really been there. But the Jets have the 5th highest deep throw percentage over the last 5 weeks, their defense. So I'm hoping the matchup can take care of some of that. So I say all that to say that if you're in a typical 12-team, 1-quarterback league or any, 10 teams, 8 teams, anything less, I still have Gino just outside of my top 12 quarterbacks. So I don't think he's the guy you have to start this week. But in leagues that are super flex or 2-quarterback, like you were talking about with Bryce Young, or if you're in a deeper like 14-team, 16-team league and you're looking at quarterback this week and you see that Gino's playing the Jets, I think that as long as the weather isn't a factor, because I believe this game is at New York, and last I looked, it looks like it's going to be fine. I think it's going to be in like the 40s and there's no snow or anything. But I don't like checking the weather this early in the week. But as long as the weather isn't an issue, just keeping an eye on that this time of the year, I think that Gino's a good start this week.
And yeah, I have to agree with you because Geno Smith, like you said, just one of those guys that for all the efficiency metrics, the touchdowns haven't been there. But in most cases, you want those guys who are going to be efficient, and efficient in a good matchup is always the thing that you want. So as for me, I'm just going to go ahead and bounce back right now to that Houston-Jacksonville's game, because we can agree that the Jacksonville Jaguars are bad all around, right? Yeah. Bad football team.
Fair. Yeah.
Except for my second smash play for this week, which is Brian Thomas Jr. against the Houston Texans. Enters this week as the ECR 26. It's a good matchup against the Texans secondary. And as you mentioned, Drew, Trevor Lawrence could be back this week. So if so, that ranking probably shoots up even higher, and that wide receiver 26 is currently a value. But even so right now, no Trevor Lawrence. It's Mac Jones. We know Mac Jones isn't great, but you know what I'm going to tell you? It's simple as this. This Jaguars offense has been so bad, but Brian Thomas has not been bad, so he is the lone wolf in this offense that is worth starting, and that is the type of guy that you want to have. On the bye week, week 11, 7 targets, 5 receptions, 82 yards, 97 air yards, a 97% roster participation in week 11. In 3 of the past 5 games, he's had at least 3 receptions and 60 yards. So the production has been there for Brian Thomas. Even with good quarterback play, bad offense, Brian Thomas still ranks as the wide receiver 14 in fantasy football this year. So he's been a strong play across the board throughout the season. He's 12th in yards after catch. He's got the 2.38 yards per route run this season. He's been a really good player for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Christian Kirk has gone down. Evan Ingram hasn't really been himself like he was last year. ETN has been a miss. Tank Bigsby has had weeks, but for the most part, it's kind of been a flop. Trevor Lawrence kind of hasn't been there. So it's really been Brian Thomas Jr. that has been the fantasy asset worth starting on that team. The only one, and like I said, in a game where route consolidation seems to be the name of the game, I want a guy who is going to get the ball on a regular basis. And right now in Jacksonville, the only guy we can really rely on for that is Brian Thomas Jr.
Yeah, and the Texans have been, especially over the top. The one thing Colby had even talked about a few weeks back is to exploit at least one specific side of the field. And it feels like Brian Thomas has the most opportunity to be able to take full advantage of that more so, especially with, if Lawrence is back. But that also does, the one thing I want to pay attention to is that shoulder and the deep ball. If that AC joint separation is hindering it, then I'm hoping they can reevaluate and get Brian Thomas just more touches in open field and let him try to do something with that. And that's going to be the one thing I'll have to try to watch this week.
They did actually get him a rushing attempt last week for a 4-yard game. So they've at least got it in the back of their heads that if they need to, it's somewhere in their playbook deep down in there. So our second round of smash players, before we get into our pass guys, Drew went ahead and Rougarou was in the building. Great to have you, buddy. Nate went with Tank Dell. Drew went with Geno Smith. And I went with Brian Thomas Jr. Getting into our pass players for the week, to remind us that is a player inside top 35 receivers, top 20 running backs, top 12 tight ends, and the top 20 quarterbacks in the Fantasy Pros expert consensus rankings. Nate, you're going to lead us off with a person who has really, for the most part, been a gigantic disappointment for fantasy players this season anyway. So why not continue to rain on Tyreek Hill's parade against the Green Bay Packers? Why not?
Exactly. Before, and Ruger had mentioned, he said he thought it was Trevor's left shoulder, and it is. And that AC joint separation, that as a result is more of a pain tolerance thing too. And I just think deep throws in general, any type of exertion of force, much more than just the typical short to intermediate routes, I think can put stress on that, is really what I was getting at. Not so much as limitations because it was directly reflecting that shoulder, but going to Tyreek Hill, there will be direct reflections of limitations as a result of a couple things. Number one, cold weather, sore wrist. Those two kind of go together like water and oil. You really don't want to see one go into the two. And it's not like I'm not trying to defend Tyreek Hill. That's just the risk, because it's been a confluence of multiple things that have made him so bad. And I can tell you, I'm really hoping for a productive week. And I hope that this is that jinx that I put on myself by Tyreek having a good game. I'm not going to sit him, I don't think, unless I had some of those teams that we've seen in the chat before, which is just crazy. But, Green Bay, shockingly enough, they've been fantastic against wide receivers, like to the point where I had no clue they've been just that good. So if you look over the past 2 months, I'm not talking about just 2-game, 3-game sample size. We're talking going back to week 4. Last time they had a wide receiver go over 70 yards was week 4. That was the Minnesota Vikings, and that was Justin Jefferson. Now, during that stretch, there's been tight ends that have eclipsed the 70-yard mark, but wide receivers haven't been. And it's not just wide receivers, garbage throwaways. It's been Debo, DJ Moore, Amon-Ra, Stephon Diggs, Marvin Harrison Jr. So I just worry. I think there's enough things going against Tyreek Hill that it worries my upside hope for him. But man, I need Tyreek to really come through, and let's just hope that he can get the ball in space and do something with it more so than what we've seen. Because it's been that one touchdown week. Was that week 10? I guess maybe when he scored was the only saving grace he's had. Yeah. I mean, it's been a rough go, guys. Been a rough go.
Did we anticipate at any point this season us talking about Jonnu Smith being the best option in that Miami passing game at any point this year?
No.
Because we're on a Jonnu heater right now, which has been super fun. But at the same time, heading into the year, we were like Tyreek, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane. This Miami offense is going to be one to own this year. And come to find out, it's kind of been
Devon Achane and Jonnu.
Devon Achane and Jonnu, yeah. So
gross.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's been a tough year for Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. The Waddle did have a good game last week.
We'll
talk about that in a little bit. But Drew, let's just go ahead and talk about your first pass player for the week. He's one of the running backs of fantasy football and the NFL in general. He's been a solid player overall this season, but I mean, James Conner, tough matchup. Tell us why we should be passing on him this week.
Yeah, I mean, right now, lately, the only thing keeping James Conner's value afloat is the receiving word, because the rushing efficiency that we've been so used to hasn't been there. He's only had 41 rushing yards on 19 attempts over the last 2 weeks, while Trey Benson, he's had 80 rushing yards on 14 attempts over the last 2 weeks. So the discrepancy in carries hasn't been there, and Trey Benson's been the much more efficient guy. And despite all of that, James Conner has still been the running back 4, the running back 20 the last 2 weeks, because he's been averaging 5 targets, 5 receptions, and over 60 receiving yards per game during those 2 week stretches where he's had issues as a runner. So he's still been getting it done for you for fantasy purposes. But considering James Conner has only had one game of over 50 receiving yards this year prior to this 2-game stretch, I'm not going to bet on this being something that's going to continue, especially given the matchup this week. Minnesota's 19th when it comes to receiving yards per game given up to the running back position. And they've also been the second toughest run defense behind Kansas City basically the entire year as well. So hopefully, since we get a 1 week break from the apocalypse, you have some better options that you can play this week, because if you can help it, Connor's a pass for me.
Yeah.
I actually almost put Marvin Harrison Jr. as one of my plays this week, simply as a result of the fact that the only way to beat Minnesota is really through the air, and primarily it's been their slot receivers to attack Minnesota. But I didn't have the guts to go Greg Dortch in a smash play.
That would
at least live. I'll put his name out there. That
honorable mention.
It would make sense given the process of attacking Minnesota through the slot, but it's Greg Dortch. So maybe it's
if he goes off, at least you've got this on a live stream now.
Exactly.
You could clip the part before you said that at the end and put it out there on the internet.
Like the Amir Abdullah Scott Fishbowl
PSA
from doing. I can't clip it down to where I just cut out, Scott Fishbowl players only. So slot receivers in the NFC West only, Greg Dortch is a decent start.
Absolutely.
And your NFC West only fantasy leagues,
Exactly.
Start Greg Dortch in those,
Even the sad thing is, I know we're going on a tangent, but even then, he still probably would be last, because it would be Cooper Kupp. It'd be Kupp when he's in the slot. It'd be JSN when he's in the slot. I'd probably take Debo in the slot, and then Greg Dortch. Sorry, Dortch.
Poor Greg Dortch.
So
we've talked a little Tyreek Hill. We've talked a little James Conner. Guys, I'm just go ahead. I'm good for about one hot take a week on the show this year. And actually, I'm going to have 2 of them. But I'm just gonna go ahead and let's pass on Jared Goff this week against the Chicago Bears. One of those Chicago Bears pass defense has been one of those defenses this year that has just kind of been a tough one to throw on. They've only given up 209 yards per game through the air this year. And if there's one thing that I've noticed about Jared Goff this season, he's got over a 70% completion percentage. He plays in the best offense in football. He's been a really fantastic real football quarterback this season for the Detroit Lions. And he's been a pretty good fantasy quarterback, except for one thing. Jared Goff offers you absolutely zero in the rushing game. So that makes him awfully touchdown dependent. And he has been pretty good at that. He has had a 6.9% touchdown rate. But for the Detroit Lions, they are 28th in the league in pass attempts per game. And they are first in game script in the league by a long shot. I think their game script on playerprofiler.com is something like plus 7.52, which is just an obscene number, just to let you know just how much they've played ahead all this season. And when they've done that, we've talked about David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs and how startable and how good they've been on a weekly basis for fantasy football. It's really benefited them. And David Montgomery probably going to play this week, but he might be a little bit down because of that injury. All that means for me is that in another spot where the Chicago Bears are going to be a tough pass defense, this feels like a really big Jahmyr Gibbs week for us this week. Jared Goff has been efficient, but with Detroit in all likelihood playing ahead again, this isn't one of those weeks where you're going to have Jared Goff throwing for 290 yards and 3 touchdowns. It's probably going to be more along this lower end, 180, 210, maybe a passing touchdown. Not super good for fantasy production, but certainly good for real football, because if you're not having to put the ball up a whole bunch and you're still able to win some games, you're in good shape.
I like it.
Yep. I do. Goff is he's such an enigma, because the weeks where, I think I've said this every week, I feel like I keep saying what Dan Campbell is going to come out and have the play calling, the one that wants to just absolutely destroy the other team, or the one that can just play smart. And Goff has 4 touchdowns on 89 yards passing, or 4 touchdowns on 400 yards passing. Both are true outcomes that have happened. So which one? Choose your adventure. Remember those books?
I sure do. And Domo, before we get into our second round of pass plays, says that he was offered JT, GP, and Evan Ingram for Bucky Irving, Najee Harris, and Marvin Harrison Jr. His current tight end is Sam Laporta. His wide receivers are Puka Nacua, CeeDee Lamb, and his running backs are Devon Achane and Tyrone Tracy. So, do y'all think he should acquire Bucky Irving, Najee Harris, and Marvin Harrison Jr. for Jonathan Taylor and GP? It's not ringing a bell for me right now. Who would that be?
George Pickens.
George Pickens and Evan Ingram. So, Taylor, Pickens, and Evan Ingram for Bucky, Najee Harris, and Marvin Harrison Jr. Drew, where are you at on that?
I think it's the opposite, though. I think he's acquiring
he's getting
Jonathan Taylor.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how I took it as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I love that you have Achane, Tracy. I don't know what Tracy's workload is going to look like after the fumble and getting put in the doghouse. So it's tough trading away 2 running backs. I like JT more than both of the running backs you're trading away. I like JT more than Bucky Irving or Najee rest of season. I think you're getting the best running back. And Pickens and Marvin Harrison Jr., they're pretty close to me rest of season. So receiver, I think, is more of a wash. Evan Ingram, I mean, I think you're going to with Laporta being your tight end one, it would be good to have another option, but I still think you're probably going to be just like, I don't think it's a huge upgrade. Like, I think you're still going to have to be doing the decision week to week of, all right, do I start Laporta or Evan Ingram this week? But at least like this week, for example, right now I have Ingram. I'm assuming that Trevor Lawrence is going to play. I have Ingram ahead of Laporta. So like, if you trade for him, you can plug him right in your starting lineup. So I don't hate the deal. I would consider doing it. It's close. I see why you might be struggling with it, but I don't mind it.
Yeah, I think the part that probably one of the pieces is assuming this is like a dynasty or at least a keeper type format, is Marvin Harrison Jr. going forward is the pedigree and the draft capital and the upside and everything else.
Yeah, I was looking at it from a complete redraft perspective. It would definitely change things if this was like a dynasty or a keeper league, for sure. But the only thing, honestly, that like really would keep me from wanting to do it, it's crazy because he's not the best player in the deal or anything, but it's Bucky Irving. That's what thinking about trading away Bucky Irving right now, it might be the right time to do it. I don't know because of how well he has played, but he has looked so good, and he looked so good coming out of the bye week, and he had an expanded role. And the schedule, I mean, hang on, let me pull it up because I think it's like right at the top. Weeks 13 to 17. So counting this week, weeks 13 to 17, they have the best strength of schedule for running backs rest of season. Like Bucky's set up to smash. They have to play the Chargers week 15, but other than that, it's all green. 4 out of the next 5 weeks, to close out the fantasy season. So it's tough to swallow that trading away Bucky, but I think it might be the right thing to do. I don't know. Would you do this deal, Nate?
I would, yeah. I just feel like I don't think Pickens to Marvin Harrison is anything more than a lateral move. I think Jonathan Taylor's considerably better than both Irving and Najee. Just weekend consistency and trust factor. And then, like you said, you're adding an Evan Ingram and Sam Laporta where just in case and maybe flex situation if you really, really had to, if Laporta got hot, especially, if Amon-Ra if this knee injury or the shoulder or whatever one he has lingers and something happens, if you remove Amon-Ra, Laporta's share in that offense should be eclipsing, 23, 24% of the targets, ideally, if someone were to miss time. But yeah, I say yes, you say yes. Rhett, you say yes to this?
Yeah, let's go ahead and make it a 3 for 3. Go ahead and do the deal, my man.
There you go.
Thank you for locking in with us, Domo. We appreciate you. And Nate, your second smash play.
Pass.
Apparently, that's pass play. Thank you. I'm sorry. We've been talking about a few of my favorite things tonight. This was one of my favorite things heading into the season, but I mean, kind of hasn't worked out because this team has pretty much been a train wreck for most of the year. So Breece Hall, talk about him.
Yeah, it has been, and I don't think any of us really going in thought Braylon Allen was going to be a thorn in his side, but it's not just Braylon Allen. It's the inconsistencies that's probably been the biggest thorn. I mean, or as I put it, the biggest bugaboo for Breece Hall in the season. I mean, you add in a midweek, did not practice today after coming off of a bye week, and that just screams concern for me. It also screams avoid. And when you look at the matchup, Seattle, I mean, they've held running backs in check for over the past few games. I would like to say, Hall will get some receptions if he plays. And you know what? Throwing that touchdown as icing on the cake for just a safe RB2 week. And I can't even say that with confidence because, I mean, the touchdown, something he hasn't done. I mean, he hasn't scored a touchdown in all but 2 games over the last 2 months. So 6 of 8, he's went scoreless. All those things adding in, the injury probably more so than anything else. Because if he wasn't injured, I would still be tempted to put him in just because of, very easily could see 6-7 targets. But I don't know, man. I think I'm going to have to look at some lineups where I have him sitting there and actually, pull the plug. I'm not killing him. I'm not killing him, Breece Hall, but DNR, just in case. I mean, it's getting close. 11, 26, 27, whatever.
Hasn't been great for Breece Hall this year. And someone else it hasn't been great for this year. Drew, signs of life, speaking of DNRs, out of Jalen Waddle last week. But Green Bay Packers this week. So why isn't Jalen Waddle a play coming out of a breakout game last week?
Yeah, and look, I really liked Waddle's draft price this year, so I got a decent amount of him. So trust me, I'm aware how good it felt to finally have that top 5 finish on the year. But I think it's back to business as usual this week. A lot of you can copy and paste a lot of what Nate said about Tyreek. into Waddle, I got to the show sheet first, so I got to cop out and take the lower ranked guy. But the Packers, they've been the second toughest matchup for fantasy receivers over the last 6 weeks. And they've only been giving up 10.8 fantasy points per game to wide receivers that line up out wide over those last 6 weeks. So that's 10 points combined to go around for everybody that lines up out wide. And that's where Waddle's lined up on over 70% of his snaps this year. And it's not like the Packers defense wasn't tested during the 6-week stretch that we're talking about either. Like, they did get to just play Brock Purdy, or the 49ers without Brock Purdy, but during that 6-week stretch, they also played Houston, Detroit, and Chicago as well. So, I mean, there were some tough games baked into there where their secondary played really well. And then, again, like Nate said, you add in the fact that Miami, they're traveling up to Green Bay. It gets a little chilly this time of the year. You know, Tua shrivels up in the cold. I don't know if that's what she said or not. But given the matchup, given what we've seen from Waddle basically all year other than this past week, he's going to be a pass for me.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that Miami offense a little bit early and how it just kind of hasn't been there all year, whether Tua has been in there or not been in there. I mean, Waddle and Tyreek Hill just kind of haven't lived up to the expectations this year. And by now, we're in week 13. I mean, it's kind of is what it is. You're coming up on the end of the fantasy season. You have enough data. You kind of have to assume at this point that anything that they have where it is a big week comes as a surprise more than what's expected. So, speaking of guys who started off hot and really looked like he was going to be on one of those trajectories, guys, Malik Neighbors is he hitting the skids right now, guys? Because that post game last week where, you know, he's smacking the gum and he's just like, it's not the quarterback, it's not the offense, I don't know what it is. Like
yeah,
it was a lot to take in, and you kind of starting to get the idea that it's not fun. It's never fun being a New York Giant, but considering what Malik Neighbors could be this year, and this is a guy who is third in the NFL in targets. He's first in the NFL with a 35.9% target share, which is just an ungodly number. Everything has lined up for Malik Neighbors to be the wide receiver 1 in fantasy this season. Yet, over the past 5 games, he has not eclipsed 15 PPR points, and he's only had one wide receiver 2 week in the last 5 games, and he was wide receiver 24 that week. So you can put whoever you want out there. You can put Drew Lock, you can put Tommy Cutlets, you can put Daniel Jones, you can put the practice squad, you can bring back Tyrod Taylor with the collapsed lung and whatever it is. Like, you can put whoever you want out there. The Dallas Cowboys have not been a great defense this year. However, if there has ever been a get right spot for the Dallas defense, it is this New York Giants offense right now, because I'm just going to go ahead and say it and just put it as plainly as I can. Malik Neighbors is a guy that we're starting on a weekly basis, and he just might be overrated right now as a fantasy asset. That's not to say that going forward in dynasty formats, he's not a buy, because he absolutely is. You know, the Giants are going to be drafting a quarterback in this upcoming NFL draft. Well, we've seen their evaluation process in the past. They tend to not do a very good job in evaluating guys who are either good culture fits or really be good quarterbacks in general. So even if they do draft a quarterback in this NFL draft, I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like for them going forward. It's just not a great time to be a Malik Neighbors owner right now. And like I said, I do think better days are ahead. I do think he's talented enough. I think he is a guy that in the future has the upside to be a wide receiver 1 overall in fantasy football. But it's just not right now. It's not this weekend. It's probably not this year for that matter.
Let me ask you guys a question. Since I have a Malik Neighbors based scenario where I only start 2 receivers. Nico's 1, Malik Neighbors is my 2, but I could swap him out for Debo, Darnell Mooney. Would you swap either of those 2 in for Malik Neighbors? Darnell Mooney against the Chargers, Debo at Buffalo, or I guess Calvin Ridley at Washington would be another option too. Do you have that much trust or that lack of faith in Neighbors to go that far. I say that far down in Darnell Mooney, who's been a wide receiver 2 all year. So it's not like that's a huge drop off. But do you have the guts to do one of those things, or should I have the guts to do that?
I'm looking at the Darnell Mooney profile right now for this season. He's played 11 games, 82 targets, 48 receptions, 711 yards, 1,019 receiving yards, 5 receiving touchdowns. He's the wide receiver 12 on the year in fantasy football versus Malik Neighbors being wide receiver 14. So you are fishing in the same hole right now. Now, the big kicker is, doesn't matter who the quarterback is, Malik Neighbors is getting 10 targets a game.
Right. I know.
So that's kind of where the kicker is. So do you go with the efficiency of Mooney, or do you go with the certainty of targets with Malik Neighbors? I think that's the question you're asking yourself right now. And I don't know if I have a good answer for it.
I still got Neighbors. I got him at 12. So, I mean, he's still a wide receiver 1 for me. The closest guy to him out of the ones you mentioned would have been Calvin Ridley. He would be, if you were considering swapping somebody out, that's who I would swap out if I was going to take him out. But I would play Neighbors if it was me. I probably shouldn't feel better about it with Drew Lock starting. I'm probably just like too invested in the fact that he was on camera rapping Young Jeezy on the bench one time, and like that just, he shot up a little bit ever since then. It's probably not much of an upgrade to Tommy Cutlets, but I do feel better about playing Malik Neighbors if Drew Lock is out there instead of Tommy Cutlets. Even though Drew Lock might not be much of an upgrade, I have to think he's better than Tommy Cutlets. There has to be like some type of I don't know if his contract, if he gets like a bonus if he plays a certain percentage of the snaps, and so they'd wanted to not to let him start immediately, right? Maybe it's just like a tanking thing, like, hey, it does us no favors to win games, so let's just put Tommy Cutlets in there because that's the least likely chance that we win the game. I don't know, but I feel like Drew Lock's a better quarterback than Tommy.
Tommy DeVito's marketable. That's the thing too. Drew Lock's not a quarterback. In New York, you can have. He has a nickname, for crying out loud.
Yeah,
Tommy fucking Cutlets. Then again, I guess New York and quarterback nicknames aren't exactly the one thing you want to have, because Danny Dimes to Tommy Cutlets isn't exactly a Hall of Fame to. Let's maybe Drew Lock should stay.
That shit just rhymed. It never made sense though. So that I don't know if that nickname is valid. No,
we'll just say that. Yeah, I'm gonna probably stick with Neighbors. It'll make my it'll wash all that sweet potatoes, mashed potatoes, and pumpkin pie down when he puts up, 9 for 67 and a touchdown.
Yeah, there you go.
Being realistic.
Before we get out of here, guys, let's go ahead and let's just quickly talk about our stash players that we have this week. Nate, you don't really have a stash, rather you have a piece of advice for our listeners. What you got, man?
I do. Drew talked about it earlier. This is the week to try to get ahead of your opponents. Look ahead to week 14. Look who you're playing. Look who you may be having to go against, their deficiencies, their shortcomings. I can tell you right now, I have a week 14 situation where both of my quarterbacks are week 14 buys. It's a deep league where there's not many on the waiver wire. And I made sure with my fab that I'm going to overspend on a quarterback to make sure I get them. But if I'm the person playing against me in that league, or I'm playing against someone else and I see that, I'm looking at the fab they have left. I'm looking at the best options. And at this point in the season, I know you should keep the dollar that you have just in case. I'm not. I am playing spoiler. If that means the best option out there, I don't need, because I have 3 quarterbacks already, which you should never have 3 quarterbacks, but you get what I'm saying. That's gamesmanship, man. Look ahead, because this bye weeks are going to be brutal, and you can definitely tip the scales in your favor.
Yeah, I love that advice, and that's something that I usually do. And I'm smiling because I'm thinking back. The first thing that comes to my mind whenever people talk about this advice, because I completely agree, but I've had it happen to me, is where I look ahead, like let's just say that the guy I'm playing in week 14, his quarterback's on bye. And so I look ahead and I see that there is a clear number 1 option on the waiver wire. This guy's week 14 matchup is gold. He's a good quarterback. Probably shouldn't even be on the waiver wire. So I'm picking him up this week and I'm stashing him. And then the waivers come around for week 14. and he picks up some random guy off the waiver. That random guy ends up going for 40, and the guy stash goes for 10 points. And I left that 10 points on my bench instead of just letting him pick it up. But that's hopefully outlier and not the norm, So I'm not saying that to say that Nate's advice, you should listen to it, because I also take Nate's advice and I do this as well. It's great advice, but it's just, that's the game we play.
Yes. Agreed 100%. Murphy's Law is what that is. Otherwise known as.
Absolutely.
So yeah, Drew, go ahead and give us a guy that you're telling us to stash. Roster in 3% of sleeper leagues right now. Has sneakily had some games already this year, but why is Calvin Austin a guy that you want to have for the rest of the season?
Yeah, he's one of those guys to where hopefully those guys aren't available in my league. Hopefully that crowd will have somebody. But like you said, he's had a couple games, so even in deeper leagues, he might be picked up. He's a big-time boomer bust guy, but he's been top 15 2 out of the last 4 games that he's played. And the Steelers have the 4th easiest strength of schedule over the next 4 weeks. They've got a tough matchup against Philly in week 15, but outside of that, it's all green for the next 4 weeks, 3 out of the next 4 weeks. So, it's obvious Pickens is the guy in that offense, but beyond that, there's not really a clear number 2 option. I'm not saying that to say that Calvin Austin would ever demand the volume to be the number 2. I'm just saying that after Pickens, the ball gets spread around enough to where in deeper leagues, especially with buys next week, he might be somebody that you can throw into the flex if you're projected to lose and you need somebody with some upside that can break a big play. He can do that for you. So with the schedule he's got, if you've got a deep bench, throw him on there.
Yeah, I like that advice as well. And I'm just going to go ahead with our last stash player for the week. We mentioned the J.K. Dobbins injury. We mentioned the tough run in. We mentioned the fact previously that the L.A. Chargers are kind of starting to gravitate and find themselves in the passing game. It's still Jim Harbaugh. Someone's still going to run the dang ball. Gus Edwards is still only rostered in 30% of sleeper leagues right now as of this morning. That's just a situation where that no matter what they do, someone is going to get 15 to 18 opportunities a game in that running game. And Gus Edwards, we've talked about it since we've done this show together, Drew, since last year. Gus Edwards is a walking 4.5 to 5 yards per carry guy. So if you just need a flex guy right now on your rosters, heading into this home stretch, I feel like you can do a lot worse than Gus Edwards right now.
Yep.
So, guys, that's where we are. That's we're Fantasy and Frames, 4th and Frames this week for week 13. Before we get out of here, Nate, just go ahead and give us a couple of things that you're thankful for this year, buddy.
Yeah, I'm obviously thankful for a wonderful family that I have, and that extends to you guys here with me now, to everybody listening. We're very blessed to be able to have the support from our loved ones that let us kind of chase a passion, as albeit if it's a hobby, if it's a job, if it's for fun, if it's for just opportunities to get together. I look forward to Wednesday nights quite a bit throughout the week, just so we can do this. And I
100%.
thankful for everybody out there that just says hello, and I'm thankful for obviously good health, and Ruguru, that goes to you, buddy. We're still thinking of you, and
Drew.
Family number one. My beautiful wife, my 2 kids. My wife doesn't even care about football or fantasy football, but she still supports me and my hobbies to no end. So I wouldn't even be able to sit down and do this stuff with this. As crazy as life is, I wouldn't be able to sit down and do this without her help. So that's number one. But then, Jorge for giving us a platform. You guys, getting to work with you guys. Nate, I couldn't agree with what you said more, man. This show is one of the highlights of our week every single week. It's something that I look forward to, that I, spend time doing research on, because if I don't, you guys will make me look like an idiot. So you keep me on my A game. So I'm blessed to get to sit around and talk about fantasy football with you guys.
Yeah, you guys are taking all the words out of my mouth. So I'm just going to go ahead and say ditto what you guys said. And also just the fact that we can have this platform on a weekly basis. I love you guys. I just love the opportunity that we have. I love all of our listeners. I love that people, for some reason, look at this goofy white guy from Louisiana, look at Nate Markham, look at Drew Scott, look at us as a trio and say, those are three guys that we trust on a weekly basis. That really means the world to me. So before we get out of here, I'm also thankful for this question from George Play 01. Says he's 9-3 in first place in a non-PPR league. And someone offered him Christian McCaffrey and Jaden Reed for Jahmyr Gibbs and DeAndre Hopkins. His thoughts? Our thoughts, his other running backs are Saquon Barkley and Bucky Irving. So he's got the Avengers on top, baby, already. But what do y'all think?
With it being a non-PPR league, my instinct was to say I would prefer Gibbs over CMC with what we've seen so far with CMC. But in a non-PPR league, that makes it a little bit closer because he does have so much touchdown upside. And if Montgomery's going to eat into anything for Gibbs, that's where he's going to. And then as far as Reed and Hopkins go, I'm just trying to look at like rest of season and stuff, what they have. Nate, do you have a big preference between Jaden Reed and DeAndre Hopkins? Because to me, it looks like they're pretty close.
I hate these kind of trades. It's this week late in the season. You're 9-3. You have this shiny kind of kit. It does. It feels like there's. I mean, I don't see a true like absolute winning scenario where you're making an upgraded position of weakness to prepare yourself for the playoffs. It just feels like it's a lateral move that if it doesn't work out and something bad does happen to CMC or Reed, or they just don't produce because Purdy's not on the field, whatever the case may be, I worry that you'll regret that. I mean, you got to 9-3 without it. So I wouldn't, just because I don't like that type of move, but that's not a true breakdown of why.
Yeah, just looking at weeks 13 to 17, Gibbs has the 6th easiest strength of schedule. CMC has the 10th, so there's not a big difference there. They both have relatively plus schedules. And then Green Bay has the 8th easiest, and Kansas City has the 14th easiest. So then, even Reed and Hopkins, they're pretty equal, and I see them equal as fantasy assets as well. So I would probably stick with Gibbs and Hopkins, but I get why it's enticing because it's a standard league. It's CMC. Like that dude can go on a roll and score a whole mess of touchdowns. Exactly. So I get it, but I'd probably stand pat if it was me. I agree with you.
Yeah. So, all right, guys. We'll be back at it next week. Week 14 already. That is simply crazy talk to me. But yeah. So season's almost over. Then we get into the off season. Then we got to start prepping and getting ready for next year, boys, and where we're going to be back bigger and better than ever. But that's not for a couple more weeks. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to sign out tonight for Fourth and Frames. You can find me on X at Armanuel Sports. Drew can be found at Drew3MR. Nate Markham can be found at Nate Markham. And as we tell you every week, God bless and toodles.
This should be played at high volume, preferably in a residential area.